She was 25 and homeless. No room, no wages, no family, door left open, just a canvas tool roll and $8 she had accepted from the man who emptied her life. And with that $8, she bought a forgotten Windsor chair Bodger's camp in Windham County, Vermont, a place erased from county maps in 1978. Half the cedar-shingled roof had folded inward. The treadle lathe stood broken, its iron shaft gone. Windham County condemned the camp on October 14, 2023, with demolition planned for spring. Yet inside the moss-black shaving horse was a sealed hollow unopened for more than 30 years, holding money and measured knowledge that would alter the shape of her days. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Wren Eliza Mercer had been leaving her whole life without knowing it. Her childhood passed in rented rooms above laundromats and behind service stations wherever her mother could trade bookkeeping for reduced rent. Wren packed quietly, keeping one sweater, 2 library books, and a bent spoon in the same grocery sack. Her mother, Elaine, had a narrow face and capable hands. She could mend a hem until the seam nearly vanished, but she could not bear an argument. When landlords raised their voices, Elaine lowered hers. When promises changed, she folded them away as though disappointment were another shirt. The one place that did not move was the gardening shed at Bellwether Farm, where Amos Vale worked Saturdays after retiring from road maintenance. I was 71 when Wren first followed the knock of his fro through the orchard. Amos had once been a bodger. On wet weekends, he split green oak billets with iron wedges, shaved them along the grain on a low wooden horse, then set them turning on a pole lathe, whose spring came from a bent ash sapling overhead. Wren held the billets while he marked their centers with a bradawl. By 12, she could feel whether a split would run true. By 16, she could draw a chair leg down with a draw knife without tearing the fibers. Amos brewed tea in a blackened kettle and set 2 crackers between them on the shaving horse. Never force green wood. Find where it already wishes to go. He meant oak, but Wren understood the harm in forcing anything frightened. Amos died during the hard freeze of February 2019. The owner cleared his shed before Wren returned from the funeral home. The pole lathe became firewood, the draw knives went to auction, and the shaving horse vanished beneath a loader bucket. Wren rescued only Amos's canvas tool roll from behind a sack of lime. It smelled of linseed oil and rain. Bellwether belonged to Harlan Pike, a man who wore clean boots in muddy weather and carried a silver mechanical pencil in his pocket. He never shouted. He controlled the farm by letting silence collect after a question until workers supplied the answer he wanted. For 7 years, he told Wren there would always be a place for her in the South Cottage. He said land remembered those who cared for it, in the same calm voice he used for invoices. On August 28, 2023, a black sport utility vehicle stopped beside the dairy barn. 2 attorneys stepped out with a representative from North Pine Residential. By 4 o'clock, survey flags stood in the lower pasture. Harlan gathered the workers beneath the equipment awning and handed each person a white envelope. Wren opened hers beside a rusted milk can. Inside was a termination notice and one worn $5 bill with 3 singles. You have until sundown. Take only what's yours. Exactly 8 words. Elaine stood beside Harlan with the office keys looped around one finger. She had known for 11 days. Wren saw it in the fresh crease of her blouse and the way she studied the gravel rather than her daughter's face. She said nothing when a deputy parked near the bunkhouse. She only pressed her lips together and moved half a step backward. Wren packed the canvas roll, a wool blanket, and 2 shirts. At dusk, she walked east with $8 in her pocket and the milk can's rust still on her palm. For 6 weeks, she moved by the cheapest roads. She slept beneath the covered stairs behind the bus station in Keene, New Hampshire, where every arrival shook dust from the rafters. In Greenfield, Massachusetts, she hid behind pallets at a farm supply warehouse until a forklift started before dawn. She spent $2 on oatmeal and $1.29 on bread and a bruised apple. Outside Northampton, rain drove her into an unlocked baseball dugout. She wrapped her feet in pages from a discarded real estate circular and woke with ink printed backward on her skin. By Brattleboro, she had $1.86 a cough. She could not warm away, and no place where her name was expected. Brooks Memorial Library opened at 10. Wren entered when the custodian unlocked the side doors and sat beneath a radiator that clicked without giving much heat. She read employment notices, then room rentals, then the county surplus listings. One advertisement had been clipped crookedly from a legal bulletin: abandoned woodworking camp, 6.4 acres, access, unconfirmed structures, unsafe tax title transfer, minimum bid $8. At the reference desk, a silver-braided librarian spread a county map beneath clear plastic. The parcel sat west of Brattleboro, beyond Ames Hill Road, near a blue line marked seasonal water. No utilities. No maintained drive. No neighboring address. Wren touched the square with one finger. $8 was more than she had, but not by much. She walked to a second-hand shop, sold her wool blanket for $7, and kept Amos's canvas tool roll. The next morning, she boarded the county bus toward the clerk's office and the $8 patch of woods waiting beyond the last paved road. The bus pulled away from Brattleboro before sunrise, carrying Wren north, beneath windows fogged by the breath of 6 passengers. She rode 12 miles before the driver stopped beside a white church and told her the county route went no farther west. The camp lay another 9 miles beyond the stop, most of it uphill. Wren tightened Amos's canvas roll across her shoulder and followed a road edged with frost-black grass. By late afternoon, sleet had begun to strike the back of her coat. She slept that night in a hay barn with one wall bowed outward, burrowing beneath loose timothy, while the temperature dropped to 27 degrees. Mice moved near the grain bins. Each time she woke, she checked that the tool roll was still beneath her arm. Morning brought a sky the color of old tin. She walked the remaining 4 miles into New Fane, where the village gathered around the Windham County courthouse, as though it had been set carefully beneath the hills. She passed Rick's Tavern, the New Fane Market, Moore's Maple Smokehouse, the Four Columns Inn, and a narrow storefront called Crowell's Hardware, its windows crowded with stove-rope snow shovels and red kerosene cans. The smell of coffee drifted from the market, but Wren kept walking. The county clerk's office occupied a low room behind a pair of heavy doors. Its floor was polished by generations of wet boots, and the radiators hissed beneath tall windows. A woman at the front desk wore a tortoise-shell chain around her neck, attached to reading glasses she lifted and lowered with one finger. Her brass nameplate read, "Margaret Hollis, Assistant County Clerk." Wren placed the legal advertisement on the counter. "I came about the surplus parcel." Margaret looked first at the clipping, then at Wren's damp sleeves and mud-stiff shoes. "The Bodger's camp." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret unlocked a gray filing cabinet and removed a folder tied with cotton tape. Inside were survey copies, condemnation photographs, and a tax deed with 3 yellow flags attached to its edge. She turned the top photograph toward Wren. The roof appeared lower than it had in the newspaper image, and the open side of the shelter faced a dark wall of trees. "You understand there is no inspected well?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the access road isn't maintained?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the structure has been condemned?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand demolition costs become the owner's responsibility?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret kept one palm on the folder. "And you understand that paying $8 does not make the county liable when the place falls down?" Wren removed Amos's tool roll, set it carefully beside her feet, and counted the money she had gathered from selling the blanket. 5 $1 bills lay flat. The remaining 3 were wrinkled from her coat pocket. I understand. For several seconds, the only sound was the radiator ticking against its pipe. Margaret took the bills, issued a receipt, and carried the deed to a black press at the end of the counter. She aligned the paper beneath a round brass stamp, pulled the lever with both hands, and raised it again. The county seal appeared deep in the lower corner, leaving the fibers ridged beneath Wren's thumb. "From here, take Route 30 south for half a mile," Margaret said. "Turn right onto West Street, then left at the fork for Dover Road. You will pass a cemetery and a red cattle gate. After Ames Hill Road turns to Gravel Watch for a stone culvert. The old logging track begins directly beyond it." She returned to the application and paused over Wren's signature. "Mercer." Wren waited. Margaret removed her glasses. Without them, her eyes seemed less official and more tired. "Did you know Amos Vale?" Wren's hand tightened around the deed. "He taught me woodworking. He paid the taxes on this parcel until 2018. Margaret opened another folder and drew out a narrow card written in blue ink. Amos Mercer Vale. That was his full legal name. Wren read the 3 names twice. He never told me. He rarely used the middle one. Margaret studied her face. "But he came here every October with exact change. He said the camp belonged to his mother's people, though the title had become tangled after the last workshop closed. He tried to clear it, but there were heirs scattered through 3 states. Why did the county take it? Unpaid taxes after he died." No one answered the notices. Margaret ran a finger down the card. "The last time Amos came in, he asked whether a person could buy a tax title property without proving family relation. I told him yes. He said that was good. Said blood was not always the truest form of inheritance." Wren looked down at the deed. The embossed seal had not yet flattened. "Did he know I was related to him?" Margaret shook her head. "I didn't say you were. Mercer is not rare enough for that. But Amos mentioned a girl at Bellwether who could split oak straight and listen longer than most adults. I believe he meant you." The radiator released a small, hammering knock. Margaret folded the county map into thirds and slid it across the counter. "You still have time to change your mind." Wren tucked the deed inside the canvas roll. "No, ma'am." By noon, she had left the village behind. The shoulder narrowed along Dover Road, where bare maple limbs crossed above her like black stitching. Near the cemetery, an elderly man in a green wool cap stood repairing a stone wall. He pointed with his hammer when she asked about the logging track. "Past the Shattuck place. Their dog will announce you." The dog was an old yellow hound named Virgil, who barked from beneath a porch without rising. A woman stacking split wood beside the house raised one gloved hand. Beyond her field, the road descended beneath walnut trees, whose fallen husks had stained the ground dark brown. Wren found the stone culvert half hidden by fern stems and turned onto a track pressed shallow into the leaves. The camp appeared after another mile. It was not a cottage as the classified photograph had allowed her to imagine. The main shelter measured perhaps 18 feet by 24, framed in chestnut posts, silvered by weather. 3 walls were enclosed with rough vertical boards. The eastern side stood open to the woods where Bodgers had once rolled fresh-cut timber directly beneath the roof. Cedar shingles remained on the northern slope, but the southern half sagged around 2 broken rafters. A short fieldstone chimney rose through the rear room, capped with a piece of rusted sheet metal. Over the entrance hung a plank sign. Most of its paint had gone, yet the carved letters remained. Vale and Mercer, Windsor Works. Wren touched the second name and felt damp lichen crumble beneath her fingertip. The front room smelled of wet oak old soot and the mineral cold of stone. Wind entered through the missing roof and stirred curls of wood shavings across the floor. They made a dry, whispering sound around her boots. When she lifted one, it broke softly between her fingers and released the faint scent of tannin. A long workbench stood beneath the open wall. Its surface was rough with knife cuts, peg holes, and a dark burn left by a lamp. A treadle lathe occupied the far corner, the flywheel leaning sideways where its shaft had failed. Rust tasted metallic in the back of her throat when she brushed the iron drive center. Somewhere beneath the floor, water moved with a slow, hollow sound. The rear room had once been enclosed for sleeping and winter work. One small window admitted green light through moss-covered glass. The chimney base was sound enough to touch, though mortar sifted beneath her nail. A narrow cot frame stood against the wall without ropes or mattress. Beside it, an enamel cup remained on a shelf, holding the husks of 3 dead beetles. Wren found a hand pump 50 yards downhill, but no water rose when she worked the handle. She returned before dark, carrying an armful of dry branches gathered beneath the hemlocks. The chimney had not been inspected, so she did not light them. Instead, she closed the rear room with a warped plank door, spread Amos's canvas tool roll beneath her head, and lay on the floor in both shirts. Cold entered through the boards and settled along her spine. Above her, loose shingles lifted and dropped as the wind crossed the roof. The sound was irregular, but not hostile. It resembled someone working carefully in another room, before sleep. Wren opened the deed once more and placed her thumb over the names carved into the sign as she remembered them. Some places do not call you home. They wait until you are ready to hear them. On the first morning, Wren followed the sound beneath the floor and found the spring-fed well 20 yards downhill, hidden under a collapsed cedar cover. She cleared leaves from the stone rim, lowered the old galvanized bucket by its frayed rope, and brought up water cold enough to ache in her teeth. The outhouse stood farther north, leaning toward a stand of birch, but still usable after she braced the door with a fallen limb. By the third day, she knew which floorboard complained beneath the workbench, which one gave a low double knock near the chimney, and which plank beside the shaving horse remained silent even under her full weight. She walked back to Newfane on the 4th morning, with the deed folded inside her shirt and 2 empty grain sacks over one shoulder. Crowell's hardware smelled of stove oil, burlap, and the iron dust that gathered beneath the key-cutting wheel. The proprietor stood behind the counter, sharpening a carpenter's pencil with a pocket knife. He had one clouded blue eye and a white mustache clipped so squarely it looked measured. "Silas Crowell," he said. "You're the girl who bought the Vale camp." "Wren Mercer." Silas looked at the mud dried to her knees. "You planning to repair it or merely survive inside it?" "Repair it." He slid the pencil behind his ear. "Those are different accounts." She set Amos's smallest draw knife on the counter as collateral. Silas turned it over, read the maker's stamp, and pushed it back. "Keep your edge. I'll open 30 days credit. I don't know when I can pay." "Then don't lie about it." He reached beneath the register and handed her a grease-marked copy of Practical Repairs for Rural Buildings. "My brother learned a roof from that book and lost only one thumbnail." Wren bought a chimney brush for $6.75, 30 feet of rope for $3.20, a wire hand brush for $2.10, 2 pounds of cut masonry nails for $4.60, and a small sack of stove cement for $5.25. Silas wrote each amount in a narrow ledger and gave her a box of kitchen matches without adding it to the page. Back at the camp, she began with the chimney because nothing else mattered until she could make heat safely. She removed the rusted cap, tied the round wire brush to the rope, and lowered it from the roof while standing astride the ridge beam. The first pull released a black cloud through the fireplace opening below. She climbed down, spread damp sacking across the floor, and worked from both ends, drawing the brush upward, then pushing it downward with a jointed pole she found behind the lathe. Creosote came loose in brittle scales, some as thick as a thumbnail. Near the smoke shelf, a tarry mass resisted the brush, so she scraped it with a bent spoon and collected the fragments in a coffee tin. The work took 6 hours. Soot entered the cuffs of her shirt and settled along her hairline. Twice she stopped because the rope burned through her palm. When the final pass brought only gray dust, she held a lantern at the firebox and watched the light appear cleanly at the top. She sealed 2 gaps with stove cement, waited until morning, and built a test fire no larger than both hands cupped together. Smoke rose without spilling into the room. The draft drew steadily, pulling the flame toward the back of the box, with a low sound like breath through reeds. That evening she boiled well water in the enamel cup and cooked oats with half an apple Silas had placed inside her supply sack. Heat moved slowly across the rear room. The chimney stones gave off the smell of damp earth and old ash. Wren sat on the floor with the cup between her palms and watched steam gather on the mossed window. It was the first hot meal she had eaten beneath a roof that belonged to her. The next morning she examined the workroom in full light. The long bench held a wooden vise whose screw still turned. A pair of rusted spoon bits hung, each forged with a different sweep. Beneath the lathe lay 3 ash poles seasoned beyond use, but marked at regular intervals with faded pencil. A bentwood armrest pattern rested against the wall. There was a froe without its handle, a block plane missing the wedge, and a bundle of chair spindles tied with linen cord. Near the open wall stood the shaving horse, its seat dark with weather, and its clamping head frozen halfway down. Wren brushed moss from the horse with a handful of dry grass. Its body had been hewn from one oak trunk nearly 7 feet long, wider at the rear, where the craftsman had left the natural flare of the tree. The upper surface bore thousands of shallow draw knife marks. The foot treadle moved only an inch before binding. She knelt and examined the underside. One section sounded different. She tapped the oak with the wooden handle of the wire brush. Most of the beam answered with a dense, blunt note. 12 inches behind the seat, the sound changed to a lighter knock. She tapped again, working outward until she found a rectangle no wider than her palm. The beam also felt wrong when she lifted it. The front end was waterlogged and heavy, yet the center rose more easily than solid oak of that thickness should have allowed. Wren wedged a scrap beneath the body, lay on her back, and ran her fingers along the lower grain. Nothing appeared cut or hinged. Whoever had opened the timber had followed the annual rings and disguised every edge beneath draw knife facets. Near the treadle pivot, her thumbnail caught on a circle the size of a nickel. It was not an iron fastener. It was a cedar disc darkened with age and fitted so precisely into the oak that its grain seemed like a knot. Wren cleaned its edge with the point of a spoon bit. The cedar released a dry, resinous scent when she pressed it. She tried to turn the disc. It did not move. Remembering Amos's habit of using wooden pins, where others used metal, she warmed the surrounding oak with a cloth soaked in hot water. After 10 minutes, the fibers swelled unevenly. The cedar remained dry. She pressed the heel of her hand against it and rotated counterclockwise. The disc shifted. Behind it lay a narrow hole. Wren inserted the spoon bit shank and felt a hidden catch release with a small wooden click. A section of the shaving horse's underside lowered less than half an inch. She did not pull it open immediately. She cleared the bench, washed her hands, and brought the lantern closer. Then she supported the panel with both palms and eased it downward. A cavity extended deep into the oak body lined with thin cedar boards. The air that escaped smelled of dust resin and the faint sweetness of old paper. The first package was wrapped in oilcloth and tied with waxed thread. Inside lay a small in-shave, 2 hand-forged, tapered reamers and a steel caliper with its points protected by cork. Each tool had been wiped with tallow before storage. Beneath them rested 4 straight-grained oak billets sealed at their ends, with red wax too old to turn green, but valuable as patterns. A second bundle contained the sketchbook. Its pages showed chair legs in profile socket angles, stretcher spacing, and the slight outward rake needed to quiet a Windsor frame under shifting weight. Numbers crowded the margins: 6 degrees at the front, 8 at the rear, 7/8 depth, before reaming 1 part hide glue to 2 parts water. Beside one drawing, a hand had written, "A chair complains where measurement becomes pride." At the back of the cavity sat a rectangular tin box. Wren carried it to the bench and opened the lid. Cotton batting covered a row of paper packets. Beneath them lay coins, each separated by folded newspaper. She opened one packet at a time and arranged its contents in lines beneath the lantern. There were Liberty Head, double eagles, Morgan silver dollars worn, Indian Head cents, and rolls of Mercury dimes, whose paper had turned soft at the ends. She counted twice, using the back pages of the repair manual to record denominations and dates. The face value did not explain the total written on a narrow inventory card beneath the last roll, but the card assigned careful values to each piece. Together the cash amounted to $31,500. At the bottom of the box lay a tarnished bronze star in a paper sleeve marked 1945. No name appeared on the metal itself. The ribbon had faded at the fold, and a dark stain marked one corner, as though it had once been held in a wet hand. A sealed envelope rested beneath it. Wren recognized Amos's habit in the way the flap had been pressed twice at the center, but the handwriting on the front was not his. It read simply, "For the one who opens the horse." She placed the letter beside the sketchbook and did not break the seal. After dark, Wren carried the tin box into the rear room, then changed her mind and brought it back to the bench. She covered the coins with their cotton batting, wrapped the tools again, and set the metal on top. The envelope remained unopened beneath the lantern. Outside, the wind had fallen. She walked downhill without her coat and stood beside the stone well. Water moved through the overflow channel beneath a skin of forming ice, black and patient under the moon. She listened until the cold reached her hands and the camp behind her became only a darker shape among the trees. Some places do not call you home. They wait until you are ready to hear them. Morning entered through the mossed window in a narrow green bar and reached the envelope before it reached Wren. She warmed her fingers around the enamel cup, then carried the letter to the workbench. In daylight, the handwriting looked older than Amos's, but one habit was the same: each lowercase r ended with a short upward hook. He had learned that hand from someone. Wren slid a spoon bit beneath the flap and lifted without tearing the paper. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then you have opened the shaving horse without breaking it. That tells me you were patient or taught by someone who was. Either is enough reason for me to trust you with what remains. My name is Ruth Abigail Vale Mercer. In March of 1988, Dr. Samuel Klein at Mary Hitchcock Memorial Hospital in Hanover told me that the weakness in my hands was amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He was kind and did not pretend the diagnosis was smaller than it was. I returned to Vermont knowing I would not again make a complete chair. This trade began in our family with Elias Vale, born in 1819 near Bennington, who came to these woods in 1847 and turned legs while the oak was still green. His daughter Martha Vale Mercer kept the camp after his death and worked here from 1879 until 1912. Martha's daughter Clara Mercer rebuilt the treadle lathe in 1921 and taught my father Amos Mercer, born in 1903, to measure rake and splay with a bevel rather than with pride. I was born in 1925 and became the 4th generation to work beneath this roof. The business closed on October 6, 1956. My husband, Thomas Vale, did not return from the Korean War. He was killed near Heartbreak Ridge in October of 1951. Our son was 6 months old. After Thomas died, I made chairs for 5 more years, then stopped when orders became scarce and factory work became cheaper. My son wanted no part of this place. We spoke very little after he left Vermont, and for more than 30 years, this workshop remained silent. Silence is not the same as emptiness. The tools in this horse were the ones I trusted most. The front legs should enter the seat at 6 degrees of rake and 8 degrees of splay. Ream the sockets only after the seat has dried below 12% moisture. Boil hide glue gently 1 part granules to 2 parts water, and never let it rise above 145 degrees. Turn oak while it is green, then dry the legs at least 14 days near steady heat before fitting the stretchers. When the joints are exact, the chair will settle under a person without complaint. The coins came from work, not luck. A few were my father's pay. Some were mine. Several were kept from Thomas's wages before the army sent him overseas. I saved them because paper money changes its face while a well-made object carries the hand that earned it. Inheritance is not possession. It is unfinished work placed within reach of another person. You owe our family nothing. Use what you need to make the roof sound, the chimney safe, and the tools useful again. Keep the sketches only if they teach you something. Sell the coins only with care. If you have children, teach them. If you do not, teach someone who arrives willing to listen. Behind the workshop, beneath the largest walnut tree, there is a small iron plate fixed into the trunk. I have left something there that belongs with the metal. Do not force it open. The proper key will present itself when the building is ready. I hope whoever reads this has known at least one person who kept a promise. If you have not, then begin with the promises you make here. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Ruth Abigail Vale Mercer, November 12, 1988. Wren read the letter twice. The second time she stopped over Amos Mercer, born in 1903. The name did not make the family line simple, but it placed Amos inside it. Perhaps he had been Ruth's nephew, cousin, or the son who returned under another name. The paper did not explain. It offered work instead. She folded the letter along its original creases, pressed each line flat with the side of her thumb, and returned it to the envelope. Behind the camp, frost still held the shaded ground. Wren found the largest walnut tree near the spring channel, its trunk broad enough that her hands could not reach halfway around it. Moss covered the northern side. On the west face, almost hidden beneath a healed ridge of bark, an oval iron plate had been fastened with 4 square nails. She cleaned it with her sleeve. At the center was a keyhole no longer than a grain of rice. Above it, someone had stamped a small mark shaped like a chair bow crossed by a draw knife. Wren touched the iron but did not pry it. Ruth had asked for patience, and the tree had already kept the object longer than Wren had been alive. Back inside, she chose the smallest heirloom object from the cache, a brass whale oil lamp with a dented reservoir and a blackened cotton wick. She cleaned the burner with the corner of her shirt, filled it with the last spoonfuls of kerosene from Silas's supply tin, and struck one of the free matches. The wick caught slowly. Its flame showed the knife marks on the shaving horse, and the old measurements penciled along the wall. For the first time, the room's darkness gathered at the edges instead of occupying the center. Wren began to understand how a life could be held together by people who never knew they were part of the same repair. Margaret Hollis had pressed the county seal and given her directions more precise than the map. Silas Crowell had opened a credit ledger for a woman with no address. The silver-braided librarian in Brattleboro had flattened the surplus notice and traced the road with one clean fingernail. Even the woman beside the yellow hound had raised her gloved hand so Wren would know the track was not entirely unwatched. Perhaps you remember a kindness like that, a meal left quietly, a ride offered in bad weather, a name spoken gently when you had begun to feel invisible. What small kindness did someone once give you that they may never have known you carried forward? That night, Wren laid Ruth's sketchbook, Amos's canvas roll, and the sealed tin beside her sleeping place. The lamp burned low on the hearthstone. Outside, frost tightened over the well, while inside the old tools kept their patient shapes in the dark. The first snow came on December 2nd, 7 inches laid quietly over the logging track and the broken southern roof. Wren read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, moving one finger beneath each diagram. The shelter measured 18 by 24 feet with 2 equal slopes. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 20 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 12 pounds of hot-dipped nails. She wrote the numbers on the workbench in chalk before walking to Crowell's. Silas studied the list, then disappeared into the back room. He returned carrying a roofing hatchet with a square pole and a narrow gauge notch cut into its cheek. "My brother's," he said. "He won't be asking for it." A man standing near the stove turned at the sound of the name. Hollis Reed was 73, broad through the shoulders, with one ear folded inward from an old fall. He had roofed barns from Guilford to Wardsboro before his knees ended the work. "I'll show you the first course," he said. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask." They worked for 11 days. Wren sistered the cracked rafter with a straight hemlock timber bolting sound wood beyond both sides of the break. Hollis snapped a chalk line above the eaves and showed her how to drive each nail in 3 strokes, set seat finish, not 4, never 1. On the 3rd morning, he touched a shingle with the hatchet head. "That nail's proud." Wren reached for the hammer. "Pull it." She learned to leave a breathing gap between shingles, to stagger joints across 3 courses, and to keep every exposed length at 5 inches. Snow melted beneath their boots during the warmer afternoons, then froze silver along the scaffold boards before dusk. They finished on December 15. Hollis climbed down without admiring the work. He walked 20 paces into the trees, looked back at the roofline, and gave one small nod. That night, rain followed the snow. Wren sat beneath the repaired slope and listened for drips. None came. January exposed what firelight had hidden. Along the chimney's upper courses, several bricks had begun to spall their faces, peeling away in thin red shells. Mortar turned to powder when Wren pressed it with a nail. Silas sold her hydraulic lime and fireclay on credit and showed her the ratio on a feed sack: 2 parts lime, 1 part fireclay, 3 parts clean sand. She dismantled only the damaged courses, numbering each reusable brick in pencil. For 3 weeks, she worked in temperatures that remained in the 20s, warming small batches of mortar beside the stove so they would not freeze before setting. She soaked each brick briefly, spread a full bed, pressed it down, then cut the joint clean with a bent pointing iron. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes. Gloves dulled her sense of pressure, so she worked without them until the mortar line began to wander, then held her fingers beneath her arms and paced the room until feeling returned. One morning, a repaired joint cracked because she had built the fire too soon. She scraped it out and began again. On January 27th, she lit the test fire with dry maple kindling. Smoke gathered once beneath the throat, then rose in a clean column. Outside, it left the chimney straight and pale before the wind carried it east. Wren stood in the snow until the last question had cleared from the roof. The white pine floorboards were sound beneath the grime, though many had lifted around hand-cut rose-head nails. Wren reset each nail with a narrow punch, driving the heads just below the surface. She rented a random orbit sander from Silas for $14 per day and carried it back on a borrowed handcart. The machine bucked hard when it reached old pitch near the hearth, forcing her to brace one foot against the wall. She made 3 passes, 80 grit, to remove the gray skin and embedded dirt, 120 to soften the scratches, then 220 by hand along the edges where the machine could not reach. Dust entered every seam of her clothes and turned the window glass pale. The first coat of oil disappeared into the pine almost at once. She waited overnight, rubbed the boards with a clean cloth, and applied 2 more thin coats. Then she closed the room for the full 48-hour cure. Under oil, the floor shifted from dark honey toward mahogany, not evenly, but according to every place where boots, chair legs, and fallen tools had pressed their history into the grain. On one bad morning, Wren woke before daylight and could not make herself lift the sander. She walked to the marsh below the well instead. A great blue heron stood among the reeds motionless except when the creek disturbed its reflection. She watched until noon. No work was done that day. The floor remained unfinished, and the camp did not reproach her. 8 windows survived in the enclosed portion of the camp. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 held an original pane from 1788, its surface wavering with small trapped bubbles. Wren preserved that pane exactly where it was. For the others, she removed each sash, numbered its position, and scraped the old putty without levering against the glass. She warmed Day P33 glazing putty between her palms until it softened, pressed a narrow bedding line into the rabbet, set the replacement pane, and fixed it with glazier's points, spaced no farther than 8 inches apart. Her final putty bevel shed water cleanly toward the wood. The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot before lowering the counterweight into the wall. The first knot slipped. The second held. By the 7th window, she could judge the cord length without measuring. At the last opening, she raised the repaired sash and tested its balance. It remained wherever she placed it. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch, no farther than an arm's length from the glass. Its black eyes followed her hand, and as she smoothed the final putty line, Wren stopped working until the bird flew. 2 winters later, on December 18, 2024, Wren completed the first chair made entirely beneath the restored roof. She had split the red oak while it was green, followed the grain with iron wedges, and shaved each billet until the draw knife left long, translucent curls across the floor. The legs dried beside the chimney for 16 days before she turned them on the repaired treadle lathe. Ruth's drawings remained open on the bench, while Wren reamed the front sockets to 6 degrees of rake and 8 degrees of splay. When she lowered herself onto the finished Windsor chair, the legs settled against the floor without rocking. She shifted her weight from side to side. No joint complained. The camp no longer carried rain through its ceiling, or winter air through empty window frames. White pine boards shone beneath the workbench. The chimney drew cleanly, and lime plaster softened the rear room without hiding the uneven oak lath beneath it. Amos's canvas roll hung beside Ruth's calipers. The brass lamp stood on the mantel, still dented, still useful. Above it waited the small key Wren had found the previous February in an oak box wedged beneath the 3rd cellar step. She had not tried it until the first chair was finished. At dusk, she crossed the frozen yard to the largest walnut tree. The oval plate had darkened since the morning she first cleaned it, but the chair bow mark remained visible above the narrow keyhole. Wren inserted the brass key. It resisted halfway, then turned after she lifted it slightly toward the trunk. A hidden iron door opened inward. The hollow had been lined with sheet copper green at the seams, but dry inside. Wren removed a parcel wrapped in waxed linen and carried it to the workshop before opening it. A folded 48-star American flag lay inside its blue field, worn pale along one edge. Beneath it was a note dated November 3, 1951, written by Ruth after the telegram announcing Thomas Vale's death in Korea. She had written that the flag should remain with his medal until someone could carry both without turning grief into display. Thomas had taken the Bronze Star from a wounded lieutenant during the final hours of fighting near Heartbreak Ridge, intending to return it when the unit regrouped. The lieutenant died before dawn. Army records later placed the medal among Thomas's effects, though it had never belonged to him. Ruth had kept it because no surviving family could be found. Wren spent 3 months tracing the name written faintly inside the medal's paper sleeve. Silas helped her telephone county offices. Margaret searched old military indexes. The librarian in Brattleboro located an obituary for Lieutenant Samuel David Rowan of Montpelier. On October 7, 2025, the anniversary of the final fighting at Heartbreak Ridge, Wren carried the medal and folded flag to Greenmount Cemetery in Montpelier. She placed them beside Rowan's marker, while a representative from the Vermont National Guard read the surviving record aloud. There was no crowd beyond Margaret, Silas, Caleb, and Reverend Boyd. Wren remained after the others left and brushed one yellow leaf from the stone. Of Ruth's cash, she used 4 coins. 1 paid for seasoned maple needed to rebuild the lathe shaft. A 2nd covered chimney brick and hydraulic lime. 2 were exchanged for glass roofing felt sash cord and the small supply of hide glue used in the first chair. Wren recorded every sale date and purpose in the back of Ruth's sketchbook. The remaining coins returned to the tin box. She wrapped them in fresh cotton, placed her own inventory above them, and sealed the shaving horse with a new cedar disc. Across the envelope inside, she wrote only 3 words. For the next one, the workshop reopened without a sign in a newspaper or an announcement beyond Newfane. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard, handmade Windsor repairs, Greenwood lessons, by appointment, ask for Wren. The first customer brought a kitchen chair with 1 loose stretcher. The second brought 2 grandchildren who wanted to learn how oak split. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in a school notebook beside the lamp. Wren accepted no more than 4 students at once. Each began with a billet of froe and the instruction to study the end grain before striking. Some hurried. Some listened. She did not decide too quickly which ones would remain. Caleb returned in June riding the same blue Schwinn, though his knees now rose too high above the handlebars. A long object was tied across his back with clothesline. He set it on the workbench without explanation. The sign had been carved from walnut and finished with 3 thin coats of oil. Its first line followed the wording on the old plank above the entrance. Vale and Mercer Windsor Works. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Caleb had added, and daughters. Wren ran her thumb through the fresh grooves. There were women here before me, she said. I know, and there may not be daughters. Caleb shrugged. Doesn't only mean yours. They hung it beneath the original sign, leaving both generations visible. The old letters had softened under rain and lichen. The new ones caught the afternoon light. That winter, Wren opened a blank ledger at the workbench. She dated the first page, tested the NIB on a scrap, and began a letter intended for someone she could not picture. My dear one, whoever you are. She wrote of the roof, the coins. She had spent the medal returned, and the first chair that remained silent beneath a shifting body. She recorded the moisture content of oak before reaming the repair made to the treadle and the exact location of the ledger. She did not explain how a person should feel upon finding it. Work would explain enough. Near midnight, she folded the unfinished letter and walked to the open side of the shelter. Snow had begun to settle over the logging track. Beyond the walnut trees, the spring moved beneath ice with the same low sound she had heard through the floor on her first morning. Some places do not call you home. They wait until you are ready to hear them. Wren closed the shutters, banked the fire, and left the new chair beside the shaving horse ready for whoever entered at daylight. The Windsor chair Bodger's camp waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Margaret Hollis kept Wren's first worn dollar in the back of her desk drawer. The other 7 had entered the county account, but that one remained beneath the old tax card bearing Amos Mercer Vale's name pressed flat under the brass seal of the deed. The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.